Good day, boys and girls. It is the 16th of February. I want to comment on something that I watched between an interview between Stephen Gardner and Colonel Macgregor. And first of all, I'll say, yes, I have a lot of respect for Colonel Macgregor as a professional, as a military professional, as somebody who tells the truth of what is going on today. But in my view, experience, and my own research, he has a very blind spot and when it comes to the Soviet Union, particularly Stalin's time. He made a long enough monologue regurgitating basically all the Western Soviet, aka Western lies about the Soviet Union, or exaggerations. And additionally, he called out the Russian people to face the truth. Well, we have faced the truth, quite a bit of it. We don't hide the truth about the things the Soviets did, unlike, say, the Americans when it comes to Indian massacres, massacres of other peoples. So let's begin. First of all, Katyn Forest, where supposedly the Soviets massacred all the Polish officers. Well, never mind, that was a German setup to begin with. Let's just do some deduction work, really basic deduction work. If the Soviet Union massacred all the Polish officers that were taken POW, let's assume that lie is the truth. In 1942, Paragraph 43, the Soviet Union stood up the first Polish army out of those POWs, a full-forced army. So you're talking about, in this case, it was Soviet terms, an army is a corps. So 3 to 4 divisions plus other assets. They stood them up, and they were fighting as part of, if I remember correctly, the Second Belarusian Front. So the interesting thing is, to begin with that, is they had a full staffing of officers, from generals to lieutenants to ward officers. Now again, if supposedly the Soviet Union massacred 40,000 Polish officers, where the hell did they get all these officers for a corps level unit? That's a lot of officers. You're talking at least 4,000 to 6,000 officers of various ranks. Secondly, from my own family, my grandfather was one of those officers. He was a Polish German, from an old German aristocratic family. He was a captain in the Polish cavalry and a surgeon. Basically, he's lost all his money on cards and had to join the army to feed his family. Happens. He was taken POW. He sat a year in the Urals in a POW camp. And then he joined the Red Army. And he finished a war major, surgeon, and a citizen of the Soviet Union. So no, they did not massacre all the officers. That finished, secondly, as far as the Soviet Union invading Poland. First of all, the Soviet Union came into Poland 2 days after the Polish government fled. So Poland had already collapsed as a government. Second of all, here's the big one. We took back the lands that the Poles stole in 1921. That's Western Ukraine and Western Belarus, where the Poles set up concentration camps for Orthodox Christians, where it forced Polonization of the population, not defending Bandera and his Una Unza army and the massacres they carried out against the Poles. But where do you think that hatred came from? It didn't come from ancient subjugation under the Poles, before those territories were added onto the Russian Empire, and eventually Eastern Poland was added onto the Russian Empire. Though there was quite a few historical memories of that. And most of that hatred came from the 1920s and the 1930s, when the Poles were massacring Ukrainians in Belarus, subjugating them in the concentration camps for refusing to become to Polonize and to change their religions, and so on and so on. and both those languages were banned under Poland, under the fascist government of Poland. Poland was the second fascist government of Europe. Yeah, let's talk the truth here. That's Mussolini, head of the Socialist Party of Italy, became the fascist dictator because fascists are socialists. Became the head of the fascist party of Italy in 1923. And Podolsky led his coup that overthrew the government of Poland and put himself in as dictator for life in 1926. Also Nazi Germany's first ally, not Italy. Mussolini, interestingly enough, and Hitler despised each other. It's just that Mussolini had nowhere to go once Mussolini gassed the Ethiopians to try to capture Ethiopia. Abyssinia, as the old name went. So he had little choice after that. Mussolini was the first one in the League of Nations that tried to organize some kind of stand against Hitler. The Poles were firmly on Hitler's side. They were his allies, and they were his representatives in the League of Nations, amongst other things. Yeah, history's like that. Not that the Poles want you to remember that. And the territories we took were the territories that were Russian, that were taken from us by the Poles in 1920. Territories that took up to 500 years to drive the Poles off of after the Polish-Lithuanian Union, if we're going to go back into history that far. So yes, history matters. The Finnish War, the Winter War is it's called. The whole Finnish War was over a stretch of land north of the bay of that goes into St. Petersburg in the North Sea. Soviet Union, and correctly, needed that land to secure the bay into St. Petersburg and secure the island of Kronstadt, which is the major fortress that defends that bay. So it couldn't be bombed, directly attacked from land. They started negotiations with Finland. They offered Finland 4 times more land in other areas. 4 times more land. Mannerheim, who had been a field marshal of the Russian Empire, who was a Finn, Swede, who was also head of the government for a while. He stood for negotiations and for giving up that stretch of land, coastal land, and taking the land that Stalin's government was offering. But he was retired at that point. And the Finnish government was being promised, a lot by the French and by the British. We've seen this show before. If they would stand up and would fight. And they stood up and they fought. And yes, the Red Army did very badly at first. Very badly. And it was a good wake-up call, in fact. Thank God for that, because that prompted a lot of reorganization in the Red Army that prepared it for when 1941 rolled around. So the Finns, when the Red Army retreated, reorganized, and started new attacks, Finland lost. And in the peace treaty, they were still given that 4 times more land in other areas, up and down the border area. Good land for that stretch of land. And in 1941, when Finland started what it calls its continuation war, and even had concentration camps to murder off the Russian population in Karelia, because they were still, and they still are, dreaming of the great Finnish Empire from Helsinki to Arkhangelsk, but there were never any Finns up on Arkhangelsk, but that's a whole different thing. When they surrendered in 1944, they were still allowed to keep that land. Because, that was just so evil. And they were never punished for the concentration camps that they kept, for the murder of Russian civilians, or for the war itself. They switched sides. In other words, they were allowed to keep their government, and were never actually occupied. Next, the gulags. The gulags were not concentration camps. The gulags were labor camps. Yes, there were gulags with extremely horrid conditions, where a lot of people died. Some political prisoners were sent there, and actually quite a few of regular inmates for murder, rape, etc. were sent there. A lot of those guys didn't survive. There were also gulags that were university campuses and then became design bureaus later on, like MiG and Sukhoi. Oh yeah. Engineers screwed up, or they couldn't meet deadlines. They were punished by the gulag system, and they were sent to gulag, except those gulags were universities. And they lived in dormitories, and they continued working. Yeah, don't ask. It was an insane period run by some really... It had its own logic. But that's a fact. As a fact, Solzhenitsyn, for all his talk about gulags, he never experienced hard labor gulags. So anything he said was from other sources. Solzhenitsyn wasn't a gulag. He was in one of these university gulags. He slept in a dormitory. He ate warm food, and it was in warmth. So the system was very wide. So to say that it was all this one concentration camp to kill off people, no, it wasn't. It wasn't. They were labor camps. They were forced labor camps. Whether they were intellectual labor camps or they were labor camps for physical manual labor, that's two different things. And like I said, yes, there were gulags in absolutely hard conditions. There were gulags in very easy conditions. That's interestingly enough, especially after World War II, the inmates in the gulags actually received salaries. Well, they're pretty miserly. But then again, look at the American slave labor system called a penal system. With 3.5 million people were in the different prisons, and a lot of them working jobs like call centers, furniture manufacturing, etc. And getting, what, $1 a day, $2 a day? Yeah, that's called slave labor. So anyways, we will continue. Excuse me. The Gulag system did cost about 3 to 4 million lives. It didn't cost 18, 20 million like everybody claims. It's ludicrous. Let's just do the basic math. And yes, during the Civil War, there were about 5 million people that died. Some died from starvation, some died from military action, some died from raids from different sides. And some died from Americans who were occupying in the East, and the Japanese, who weren't exactly too nice to the natives, and so on and so on. But the claims, the ludicrous claims that come out of the West about the Soviets killing off 30, 40, 50 million people, and why stop there? Let's go for 500 million. I mean, okay, let's do the basic math here. The Russian Empire, at its height before World War I, had 178 million people in it. About 5 million people died in World War I. 4 to 5 million. Civilians and military. So that's 174. Well, let's even say 1 million were born. So that's 175. Poland, Finland seceded. So let's minus another about 30 million right off the bat, 20 million. Somewhere around there. Let's say 20 million. Let's keep it conservative. Really, it's closer to 30 million, considering Poland was relatively densely populated. So we're down to 147 million. Another 5 million died during the Civil War. 140... So we're down to about 142 million. Another 4 or 5 million immigrated. So we're down to 138 million. Okay? Gulags, another 4 million. 134 million. 500,000 in the Winter War. 133 million. Plus other issues and conflicts. Let's even say 4, 5, 6 million were born. So we're at 140 million. 140 million. Now, if we go with the Western numbers of, instead of 4 million, 30 million, we would have had 110 million. We would have not had enough manpower to back the army at that point against basically about 150 million Europeans, because it wasn't just the Germans that fought us. Oh no, let's be real. The Charlemagne division broke its way into Berlin's encirclement to defend Hitler. Let that sink in. Granted, there were only a brigade at that point. But yeah, they did that. There were more French that were fighting us than were in the French underground. There were Norwegians, there were Danes, got Hollanders. There were Belgians. Of course, we know Italians and Croats and Romanians. For their credit, the Bulgarians never left Bulgaria. They supplied Hitler with materiel, but they never actually fought outside of Bulgaria. There were Czechs. There were 60,000 Poles. True, about half of those were ethnic Germans, but the other half weren't. Every nationality in Europe, except the Portuguese, fought against us. Even the Spaniards sent the Blue Division that was exterminated outside of St. Petersburg, as it well deserved. Everybody fought against us. So there's no way in hell, if we had a population of 30 million less, we would have had a chance of winning, just from lack of manpower. And considering that most of the people who went to the gulags were men. So no, the math wouldn't add up in any sense of the matter. And yes, we lost 27 million people, 7 million of those soldiers. But here again, we start with the fact that no, we didn't just attack them in body waves. Because when you take out one simple factor, that 3 million POWs were taken in the first year, and yes, a lot of those guys did surrender thinking that the Nazis were coming to help them defend, overthrow the communists. Well, I'm not going to dispute that. But out of those 3 million POWs, 1 million survived into the next spring. The Germans and their allies murdered off 2 million POWs. Starvation, forced labor, clearing minefields by walking through them. A great European tradition that their Ukrainian Nazi stepchildren are conducting today. All the best. Oh, and human experiments. God forbid we forget that one. That was to always enjoy a little human experiment here and there. For the sake of science, of course. Not sadism. And so on and so on. So if we subtract those 2 million out of the 7 million, that's 5 million that died. And some amount died additionally out of those in POW camps the rest of the world. Let's say another 500,000. So we're down to about 4.5 million that died in combat. That's the same losses that the Germans took, plus all of Europe that fought on the German side. So all of a sudden, it doesn't look that bad if you actually throw away the Anglo bullshit that was spawned after World War II to try to stir up everybody's pride and prejudice that we can take the Soviet Union, no problem, look what these idiots do. Same crap that you hear right now about Russia. With 500,000 dead Russians, 7,000 or 8,000 or 9,000 destroyed tanks, 10 million destroyed cars and vehicles, and our planes can't fly, and we're stripping washing machines and dildos and whatever else. You know, all of this crap that you hear constantly, all this crap, this propaganda, and it hasn't changed any, really. The names have changed, but nothing much has changed in that propaganda since, the 1800s. Actually, it's not even the 1800s, since the 1600s. Even the Potemkin village crap was made up by the British. Potemkin actually built villages. They didn't make little show-faced cardboard cutouts for Katerina the Great to see. That was lies spread by the British. Again, Anglo's lying. Go figure that one. Even the truth of Ivan Grozny, Ivan the Feared, not Ivan the Terrible, murdering his own son is a lie. There's no historical facts behind that. His son, Ivan Ionovich, died of fever. He didn't die from a head strike on the head. That's another lie. And the painting was commissioned and was known to be a lie. It was commissioned by the liberal groups in Russia back in the 1880s. So, yeah. So from that point, and again, I'm not defending the Soviet Union. Personally, I'm a monarchist. But I do believe in historical facts. And I want to take one other shot here. And while I do respect Tucker Carlson, I respect him for truth, Tucker needs to learn a few things too. When he says a comment like, Moscow is a great city. It's come a long way. I've never been there. My father was there in the 80s, and in the 80s, they barely had electricity. Are you fucking serious? So the country that can put up a space station that America didn't have, we had. The Soviet Union had a space station up. It had a full-blown rocketry program in 1991, in the 80s. Could barely have electricity in its capital city. Electrification of Moscow and other cities started in the 1890s. I mean, if Russia was, and then the Soviet Union was that incompetent, how was it kicking the U.S. in the balls for all the Cold War? I mean, if they can't do anything, they can only steal everything, they can't manufacture anything, they don't even barely have electricity in the capital city. Wow, what does it say about the U.S.? Because, let's face reality, the Soviet Union was often enough times kicking the U.S. in the balls. No, the U.S. was kicking the Soviet Union in the balls. But a simple fact. If they were your opponent so incompetent you can't take them down for 50 years, but they barely have electricity, wow, that doesn't say much about you, does it? It's like a wife that calls her husband an ass. Well, you're the wife of the ass. Think about it. And think about the words you're using. I mean, it's ludicrous. The Moscow subway, the giant hydroelectric plants and everything, the nuclear power plants, yeah, they were built under the Soviet Union first. So, let's have some historical truth. Again, I'm a monarchist, but I am all for historical truth. We won't even go into the U.S. historical truth, like the fact that the U.S. was conducting forced sterilization of American Indian women up to 1979, until Mrs. Rodriguez, as a representative for American Indians, not Indians from India coming to America. American Indians were being sterilized, some forced, some tricked. And about a third of young women were sterilized, even up to down to the ages of 14. She brought it up to the UN in 1979. Not 1879. 1979, for God's sakes. Forced sterilization of your indigenous population to try to murder them off. That's a form of genocide. We do understand that. So no, let's not even talk about that. Or the fact that there's large areas in the Appalachians that still don't have electricity. Gasification outside of major U.S. cities is almost non-existent. The vast majority of the population in the mountains and in the north heats their homes with fuel oil. Giant tanks of fuel oil that they put out in their yards. Because there's no gasification. There is nothing higher than you're just burning something in your house to heat your house. And in the South, it's electricity. Of course, I know this from first-hand experience, all of this. In the South, it's electricity. And if that electricity switches off because of a winter storm, SOL, baby. SOL, shit out of luck. So when you're talking about Moscow barely had electricity, seriously? I mean, the South is great as long as it's warm. And how many ice storms come through? Oh, everything looks brilliant. It looks like diamonds. Right up to the point where the first branch falls and takes out the power lines. The same power lines have been up, or the same model of power lines have been up since, 100 years before. Because they don't bury anything. It's too expensive. They just string along the same old poles, wooden poles. And sooner or later, because it's usually trimmed crappy instead of to standards. This costs a lot to trim it, but not that the work is worth it, the cost. And sooner than later, one of those branches falls, takes out electricity to everybody. And then you're sitting in the dark and the cold, because you can't heat your house any other way. Yeah. So let's talk about, barely electricity. And that's supposedly in the richest country in the world. So, again, let's talk historic truth. I'm not here to insult and cut down, but if we're going to start pointing fingers. So, I hope this helped. Again, I do have a lot of respect for Colonel McGregor. I got respect for Tucker Carlson. I don't mind sitting down and rapping with him. I doubt it he knows I exist. Even though we were all in the same wheel of Russian propaganda that Vox Czech, an American-funded slush fund in Ukraine, put out, which is funny because it's all Western propaganda. I'm not Western propaganda. Yeah, I put out these YouTube videos once in a while, and I do speak to some American and even Australian alt news sources, but I'm Russian. It's all Russia. So there were a couple other people on there that weren't in America. Not that, you know, a U.S. aid slush fund needs to be accurate. They just need to justify what they do to get the money and the kickbacks that they offer to the most corrupt government in probably human history, they're called the United States of America. I mean, come on. The difference, of course, between American corruption, if we're on this point, and say Ukrainian corruption is much more blatant. American corruption is made prettier by legalized bribery and kickbacks called lobbying. I mean, come on, there was a report that came out under Obama that the best place to invest in the world was the U.S. government. For on average, every dollar invested by lobbyists into an American politician at a federal level brought back $250 out of the government till. I mean, seriously. That's 25,500% return. Where else can you find that? Short of robbing another country. What? Yeah, like, you know, Syrian oil and grain. But even that I don't think brings back that kind of percentages. So yeah, there you go. All right, God bless.